one text. You'll notice only two preachers here today. David is out of town, and I was out of town yesterday, so there were two preachers yesterday. But we'll make up for that today. Thanks for joining us. We are in Romans chapter 2. We're going to begin in verse 17. Romans chapter 2, verse 17. Yesterday, David and Austin looked at verses 1 through verse 16 of Romans chapter 2, where Paul in this text is talking about the gospel and how mankind has turned against God. And by the end of what we know to be chapter 1, all the Jews who had been going, yeah, that's right, you tell the Gentiles. But in chapter 2, Paul turns his attention to the Jews and how they had rejected the law and how they would be judged because they were rejecting the law. And he really begins to draw this out even more in the latter part of chapter 2. In chapter 2, it begins with verse 17, but if you call yourself a Jew and rely on the law and boast in God and know his will and approve what is excellent because you are instructed from the law, if you are sure that you yourselves are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness, and a instructor to the foolish, teacher of children. So it says, you set yourself up to be the self-righteous people of the world, the ones who guide everyone. You know what's right. But it begins to go into the big problem, and the big problem was they weren't actually doing what was right. They knew what was right. They proclaimed what was right to other people, but they weren't doing it. And in particular, in verse 25, he says, for circumcision, which was what they sort of held to, and that's what made them right, indeed is of value if you obey the law. But if you break the law, your circumcision becomes uncircumcision. But in verse 29, he says, God's really pleased with those people who actually do what they're supposed to do. So, Austin, what do you see here?
Well, I wanted to notice verse 19, which is really in this broader section. And if you are sure that you yourself are a guide to the blind, a light to those who are in darkness. Like Mark said, the Jews were given the law. Paul says their advantage was they were given the oracles of God. The problem was they think they can teach everybody about that, but they weren't doing it. They were hypocritical in their approach to it. And so in verse 24, Paul says, for as it is written, the name of God is blasphemed among the Gentiles because of you. That's a really scary place to be. They were blaspheming the name of God among the Gentiles because they claimed to have the truth, because they told people, we can guide you, but they weren't following it themselves. And there's a really serious lesson in there for Christians today. If we claim to have the truth and we're going to teach that we have the truth, we need to make sure we're living the truth. We need to make sure that we're doing what we need to do. Otherwise, we can be in danger, just as they were, of blaspheming the name of God among those who do not believe.
Yeah. And building on that and finishing up in verse 29 just a moment ago, his praise is not from man, but from God. The praise that we get from God is a praise that comes when we obey God. That's an incredible thing, I think. Any parent will tell you when they love their children, they're proud of them. And their children do things that make them proud, and they're pleased with them. I think it's an incredible idea, Austin, that we can do something that God praises. And that, within this text, is actually obeying him. Jesus said in John chapter 14, verse 15, if you love me, keep my commandments. And over in 1 Samuel chapter 15, verse 22, when Samuel was rejecting King Saul for his disobedience, he said this, has the Lord as great delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord. That's what God wants more than anything else, is for us to have genuine hearts of service to him. Well, that's what we have today. Thanks for joining us tomorrow. We'll get into chapter 3. Have a wonderful day. God bless.